Only murders in the building. Wow, I feel like you're really limiting yourself then. Hey guys, Melinda here. This week, we are going to be talking about the Hulu original TV series, Only Murders in the Building. This was released last summer in 2021, and I had been wanting to watch it way before then, like ever since the first trailer came out for it. Finally had the opportunity to sit down and watch it, and boy, was I not disappointed. I have a lot of really good things to say about this show, but I also do have some nitty, picky details that I weren't a fan of. So we're gonna go into all of that details. For those of you who haven't seen any of my other movie or TV reviews, I like to review it in a way that gives no spoilers, so that way anybody can click onto this video, get an idea if they want to go watch it. We're gonna go ahead, roll right into this review, but first let's go ahead and go over some of the general basis stuff. First things first, Hulu original series, not based on anything, a fantastic show that they put together. It is a comedy and it has the trifecta of big name actors that you could think of. Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez. I will admit that when I first knew that it was gonna be those three doing this show together, I was a little hesitant because I could not picture, okay, maybe Martin Short and Steve Martin, but throwing Selena Gomez into that mix was a little bizarre, and they do reference it a lot in this show, talking about the age differences, how on earth can they be friends, blah, 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 blah. But I don't know, their chemistry together was fantastic. I thought the three of them did an amazing job on this show. They each played their characters so well, and the dynamic that the characters do share with one another is incredible. Yes, I will admit it's a little weird to have the three of them cast together as the main characters, but just give it a shot. You won't be disappointed. It was really, really great. And then not to mention some of the other big name guest stars that they had in this show, who, by the way, all did a phenomenal job as well. We got Aaron Dominguez, Amy Ryan, James Calvary, Tina Fey, Sting, Jane Lynch, Jimmy Fallon, and a bunch of other people that I don't recognize, but you very well could recognize while watching this. Only Murders in the Building was rated 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. That is incredible. I don't know that I've ever seen 100% from Rotten Tomatoes on anything, so that says volumes right there alone. Was rated an 8.1 out of 10 for IMDb, and 87% like this show of Google users. So overall, very well rated, and I agree. I think it was great. I don't know that I would give it 100% like Rotten Tomatoes did, but it was a very, very clever and amazing show. So just to give you an idea of what this show is about, so we got the three characters, Charles, Oliver, and Mabel, all live in the same building of the Arconia. One night, the fire alarm starts going off, so everybody evacuates the building. They go to a nearby restaurant, and the three of them basically all connect because they share a love of crime mystery podcasts. And their favorite one just released a new episode, so they all came together, they talked about it, had a grand old time. Only to come back to their building to reveal that a murder had been taken place. Or I guess I should say a suicide was taken place. The three of them believe that it is a murder, so then they start doing their own kind of detective work, and then they decide to make a podcast out of it themselves. Normally, I say no spoilers. I do want to say mentioning that there is a podcast involved is a little bit of a spoiler, but I won't go any further into that. That just ties into some of the details that I will be talking about today specifically, so that's the only reason why I'm telling you. No spoilers from here on out. There you go. General basis and stuff to go over before I go into details, but now we're gonna roll right into those specific details. And boy howdy, let me tell you, I have like 5 pages of notes. So bear with me as I go through all of them. Let's dive in and discuss Only Murders in the Building. So we start off episode 1 of a minor introduction to each character and a glimpse into their life. Right away, already piqued my interest because all of these characters have such a different dynamic. Again, that I was curious, how on earth are they going to connect and become become friends. And let me tell you, it wasn't the strongest story that brought them together. We're introduced to them individually, we get to know a little bit about them, and then the first scene that we see of them together are them getting on the elevator of their apartment building. Immediately there is disdain for each other, they don't like it, they're annoyed. Oliver's over here just trying to make friends, but Charles and Mabel are not having it and just want to be on their own. That's the first introduction that we get to these three characters. Again, fire alarm goes off, they meet at like a restaurant down the street or whatever. Charles has like this big diagram that he's trying to figure out the mystery going on within this podcast. So Q, Oliver, Mabel come in, they see like this map that he's working on, and that's how their friendship begins and how they connect. To me, I don't know, just felt, I guess, too forced. It wasn't the strongest story to bring the characters together, because I'm just thinking, what is the absolute likelihood of all of these people that live in this building that they listen to the exact same podcast? To me, it seems like a stretch. I can understand it, especially with how podcasts have taken off these days, but I don't know, there's still a part of me that just doesn't feel like it was strong enough, that it is a reach to connect all of these characters together. Aside from that, my other issue that I have with it is the fact that they all meet at this restaurant. They all just happen to go to the same restaurant as the emergency fire alarm has been pulled at their building. I don't know, it just feels like lazy writing, just trying so hard to get these characters connected considering how different they all are. In my mind, as I was watching this, I was thinking that there were so many different routes and paths that they could have taken to connect these characters, and I wasn't the biggest fan of how they got introduced to each other. We're gonna move aside from that, but going back really quickly, just touching on the brief introduction that we have to each character. They each have a solo moment where they narrate their own story. I love that. I love the introduction to all of them, how they each had their moment to shine, and we got that moment to actually kind of better understand the characters in just the quick snippet that we get of them. I thought it was a very clever and unique way of catching the audience up to speed, but without having to take too much time out of the show. Next big thing I would say I would talk about is that once the three of them learn that there has been a murder in their building, they take it upon themselves to sneak past police to go look at the crime scene. What actual person has that thought, unless they're a sociopath, that they're going to break into a crime scene that is currently under investigation to go see what happened? What logical, normal person would do that? That then again ties in with my thought of, again, it's just being too forced, it's being too rushed. The writers needed an excuse to bring these three characters together to create the main premise and plot of the series. I just had a lot of issues with them meeting, them connecting. Don't get me wrong, the whole rest of the series is great. Again, great chemistry, funny, clever writing, but just, I don't know, I felt like they could have done a better job at the introduction. That's probably the biggest issue that I had with it. Moving on. The writers do a very great job immediately building sympathy for Oliver. Again, you can just tell from him in the elevator, he's lonely, he wants friends, he's personable, he wants to talk to everybody, and Charles and Mabel are not having it, so the writers do a really great job at immediately creating sympathy for him, only to take it away in a split second when we learn who he actually is. Unexpected, very unique twist to it. Bravo to the writers on that part for thinking that we're getting one side of his character only to reveal that there is a whole nother side that immediately disregards any sympathy that we had for him. We're still in the first episode. We haven't even moved on to the remaining episodes. So the next thing is that Mabel and Charles have a moment to connect, and they get very personal, very deep, very quickly. Had known each other for maybe a day or two at this point and are starting to reveal some really personal details with each other. That just felt uncharacteristic to me. If I make a new friend and it's only been 2 days, I'm not gonna spill my entire life to them. We're not that close of friends just yet. So again, it's a way to move the story forward. Again, it felt too rushed, too forced, and not timed well. It should have been introduced maybe later on. It's episode number 1. We're still trying to get to know these characters, understand the story, know what's going on. We're still in that exposition phase, and we're really cutting corners here. So forced, rushed are the two words that I would definitely definitely use to define this first episode. Okay, I think that's pretty much the conclusion of episode 1. The rest of my notes going forward will be in reference primarily to the show as a whole, because from there on out, it was actually really, really good. Next thing that I wrote is it's a very, very smart and clever story. Very unique writing, done very well. I was obsessed with it. I loved it. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time, excited to see where the story goes, what twists, what turns, just done really well. The cinematography in this show was beautiful. Unlike any TV series I've ever seen, I thought they did a very good job at the way that they captured emotions, actions, anything like that. They did a phenomenal job with it. There were several beautiful, unique, and breathtaking shots that I wish I could give that single moment its own award, because it was just that good. It takes a whole new perspective and tells the story in a completely new way. And again, just amazing and phenomenal what they did with it. Going back to the stuff that was delivered in that first episode that I felt was too personal, too details, I will give it, that was only a fraction of the whole truth. And it later turns into secrets for both Mabel and Charles. So again, I thought it was delivered too early. It wasn't timed perfectly, but I do have to admit, I was very ecstatic and intrigued to learn that we only got a sliver of what the truth is, and was very eager to learn more about the secrets that they're hiding from each other. So talking about the podcast now that they decide to do, they are podcast freaks. They are obsessed with it, and so they decide to create their own podcast as they dive into this mystery and decide to play detective. I thought the idea of doing a podcast was very silly, but also funny, because that's where a lot of the comedy comes into play. But it is actually very relatable to today's society with, you know, anybody could be famous on any platform at this point. You could be Instagram famous, TikTok famous, podcast famous, YouTube famous. There's like so many different ways that you can be an influencer and be in the spotlight. So creating their own podcast is not far-fetched for the way that the world is these days. And it does make sense because Charles is an actor of a show that was like 20 years old. He really struggled to find work after it. So that's like his one big hit that he had so many years ago. And then Oliver is a big time Broadway director that all of his shows flopped. So he, of course, was no longer in the spotlight. So having the two of them together where they are desperate for attention and to be famous again, starting this podcast is not, again, far-fetched for them. The idea to me just felt a little silly and kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I can't exactly explain it. It was just a feeling I had while watching the show. But yeah, I just thought that was important to mention. There's a lot of language, adult language, and adult content, I should say. So probably not good for the littles. There are a ton of F-bombs and S-bombs that go off, almost to the point that I was a little shocked because, you know, Steve Martin has been in a lot of like family-friendly films. So to see him drop all of those curse words was a little shocking for me. And also Selena Gomez, grew up with her on Disney Channel. So to see this different side of her, I know that she probably is like that. But you know, growing up as a child star and somebody that I grew up watching, just to see this adult side to her just had to take me back for a second. I was like, oh wow, Selena Gomez is an adult now. I forgot. There's that fair warning for you guys. The show was very comical and had a lot of clever and witty humor to it. Very thought-provoking, sophisticated, and very mature humor. I thought it was done very well. All the characters at one point or another are very obnoxious to the point that I am annoyed while watching them on screen, but it comes and goes in waves. Enough to the point that it doesn't make me turn it off because I am so done with these characters, but enough that didn't really have sympathy for them until later on when their characters develop and stuff like that. They all have a very good growth experience, learning experience. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to all punch them in the face. Something that I caught on is that the story tried very hard to convince the audience of how it's gonna play out. I guess I would use the term on the nose, like very hardcore telling you this is the way we want you to think the story's going. And by default, it makes me think that's the opposite. The writers are laying the groundwork for you to believe that this is going to be the outcome. This person is the killer, but because of how direct and in your face they are with these details, I knew immediately that that isn't the killer. That isn't who we think it is. That isn't the way the story is gonna play out. We're gonna move on. It was a little bit of a spoiler, but I just have to mention it. There's a dude that lives in the building. Same night as this murder, his cat gets killed. He is one of the best characters in this whole show. He is just such a sad little individual. He's so funny. And then he keeps his dead cat in the freezer. That whole scene and moment was hilarious, perfect, everything that I wanted. The inclusion of Sting and his story and his connection, hilarious, beautifully written. The fact that it actually is Sting, like they just out of nowhere have this famous musician that agreed to do this, like chef's kiss. Just amazing. All of it was phenomenal. Loved his character, his story arc, and the role that he played in this show. It was just so funny. So we learn Mabel's age in this show is 28. So she is in her older 20s, fairly mature adult, but I feel like the writers had to purposely make her dumb in a sense. Like she's tech savvy, but whenever they bring up, in particular, Sting, she had no idea who he was. I feel like anybody that is in a millennial generation, such as Mabel, everybody knows who Sting is. So there are other scenarios like that, just trying to show the age difference between Mabel and Charles and Oliver. And I just feel like they really played it up and made her dumber than she needed to be. So I wasn't a big fan of that. I get the point, again, is to showcase the age difference between them, which is also a comedic layer to the whole story. But yeah, I just, for someone who is an older adult in this show, they just made her way more dumb than I feel like she needed to be. I like that as each episode progresses, we get a sprinkle of all the side stories that's going on with Charles, Oliver, and Mabel, but each episode there's at least a focal point on one of them, that we get a little bit more details into their story, and I just like that it rotated between all of them. It was a great way to keep the audience's attention and keep them intrigued. I thought that was very clever and smart on their end, and they did a really great job with it. I also really liked how every episode was narrated by a different character. And the further we went into the show, the less significant the character got. So of course it starts with Mabel narrating, starts with Charles narrating. We get to the end, there's an episode that's narrated by the police officer involved with the case. We don't see her the whole series, but then now at the end, she is narrating an episode. Also, another episode is narrated by a fan of the podcast. Not to discredit or anything, but how insignificant of a character can they get? It just added a comical layer to the whole story as overall. I thought it was really done well. It was very funny. It was very fun to watch. There's a relationship that we learn with Mabel and Oscar. I don't want to give too many details as to how we get introduced to Oscar, but just know that the friend group that we are introduced to with Mabel when she is a young teenager, he is among that. They reunite after 10 years of not seeing each other. All of a sudden now they have a thing for one another. There was no prior hint to it. This kind of almost feels along the line of being too forced and too rushed again. We need the audience to root for something with Mabel, so let's throw in this guy and make them have a relationship with one another. It just felt very out of the blue, no prior setup to it, showcasing that they could possibly have feelings for one another. Do also want to note there are a few moments with Charles Charles and Oliver that showcase how old they are and they don't know how to use technology. They're struggling with their phones. There's a scene they want to connect with Mabel, so Charles is asking Oliver, should I text? Should I call her? Just playing into those older stereotypes, and was all for it. Was very funny. Again, just ties in with the generation gap between them. Everything that they did involving that was hilarious and done very well. Oh, I also forgot to mention, because this is later on, there's a deaf character in this show, and there is an episode where he is the narrator, which is amazing because he breaks the fourth wall, he looks at the camera, he signs something like, this is gonna be my story now, and the whole episode is silent. There's no dialogue. There are sound effects, there are music, but there's no dialogue, even with the hearing characters. I just loved that episode as a single unit for that whole purpose, to showcase that you can tell a story without dialogue. You don't need characters to speak with one another to know what's going on, and I just thought that was brilliant. Amazing episode, probably my favorite out of all of them. I was obsessed with it. I was all for it. Really highly recommend that you guys watch this show just for that episode because it was that good. Coming up towards the end of the season, there is something that gets revealed to the audience but isn't revealed to the main characters just yet. I personally am not a fan of that because there is this disconnect then that the audience has with these characters. We go through this whole story learning about the characters, learning more about this mystery about the murder, and then now we're giving a detail that is key to the whole thing that the characters don't know. I don't know, it kind of takes away that element of surprise and again just creates a disconnect with the main characters at that point because we're already one step ahead of them. I'm just not a fan of that. I love getting that big reveal with the characters so then we can feel just as shocked as they are. Not sure if this was the show's intent or I am just that smart. I guessed very far in advance who the killer was. So yes, not sure if the show had planned to do that, if they left enough clues and hints throughout to have the audience guess it. Having the writer's brain getting into that side, the second something seemed off to me, I guessed immediately who the killer was. Also, just have to take a moment. Jane Lynch plays the stunt double of Charles from the show that he was on in this show. I just loved her character. Loved the dynamic between the characters and loved her episode. That's all I'm gonna say. One big thing that I definitely thought about and was curious about is that I would love to see this story being told without any prior spotlight famous people in it, you know? We have a previous Broadway director and then we also have the main star of a TV show from like 20 years prior. They were both famous and they were known at one point or another, which helps boost when they release their podcast because everybody's like, oh, the guy from Brazos, that was his show. The guy from Brazos now has his own podcast and that's how their podcast became big and became well known. And I'm just thinking, how differently would this story have been told if nobody in this group had prior famousness? If it was just three randos on the street, how successful would their podcast be? I'm that curious. That's all. Just a side thought that I wanted to share with you guys is that I would just love to see how different it would have turned out if there wasn't that prior plant. The last episode of the season is narrated by the guy who does get murdered. So I thought that was really fun and different. Applaud the uniqueness of that. It was just a really great way to end the season. We are at the last episode, last scene, very dramatic, unexpected, and we are left with a big cliffhanger, which then makes me want to go and watch the next season, which I discovered is coming out this summer. I'm very excited for that. I am very prepared and want to see what happens in season 2. I do have an issue with the cliffhanger though, but that does go into some spoilers, so I won't go into details, won't go any further. I really need to wrap this up because I know I've been rambling for a lot. I just had so much to discuss about the show. That is everything. Those are all my notes, all my thoughts. I thoroughly, really did enjoy this show. I know that I nitpicked a lot and I did have some issues, but overall, this was an incredible show. Beautifully shot, a lot of one-take shots that were really cool and shared a unique twist to what was being told in the scene. Beautifully written, very clever, very witty, and the comedy was very mature and sophisticated sophisticated and, again, just brilliant and smart. Everything about this show was incredible, and I think that it does deserve the positive ratings that it did get. There we go. There we have it. I'm done. Go watch it. Very highly recommend this show to everybody. You won't be disappointed. But that's it. That is everything. I'm gonna stop, or I'm just gonna get repetitive. If you guys want to discuss anything, you have any questions, please leave it down in the comments down below. I would love to go into a discussion about this show, especially with season 2 coming out soon. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you all for the support. If you like this video, go ahead, give it a big thumbs up. It would absolutely mean the world to me. And make sure to hit that subscribe button if you're not already and you want to see more content. With that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. Live life, always laugh, and enjoy the journey. Bye. I have no brain today. I don't have a brain any day.